Hello out there. We are live in the studio at WPVM 1037 in Asheville, North Carolina, with my guest, Matt Hoagland, who has written a book that I read over the weekend, Think Small, A Millennial's Guide to a Meaningful Life in Rural America. Welcome, Matt. How are you doing?
Hi, Davine. I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, and thanks for coming on. Thanks for contacting us. And so you are in Yanceyville now, and I knew you from Asheville. I think I first met you, it was probably 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Whenever I was live streaming a candidate forum on the upper level of Pack Square, and you were I think you were working with Mark Cates running for
Asheville City Council. Yeah.
So your life has changed a lot since then, and mine has too, obviously. What prompted you to write your book?
Well, thanks for asking. Yeah, I apologize that we didn't meet sooner. I actually worked for a little-known campaign, I think the year before, a guy by the name of J. Neil Jackson. Was the first Asheville City Council campaign that I ever worked on. But yeah, as you mentioned, I used to live in Asheville. I moved to Asheville after graduating college in 2010, and my wife lived there for quite a while. And then for a few reasons, including the fact that her family was here in Caswell County, we decided to move in late 2015, and we moved to Caswell County, and specifically to the small town of Yanceyville, North Carolina, in early 2016. And so since moving here, we would talk to old college friends or folks back in Asheville, or we would meet people at weddings that lived in, Washington, D.C. or Denver or Atlanta, kind of tell them about ourselves. And they would say, wow, there's no way we could ever live in a really small town that's only 2,000 people, quote unquote, in the middle of nowhere. And so as we talked to them, we would say, well, actually, we didn't know what to expect when we moved here, but life has been great. When we moved here, we were engaged, we got married, and we basically built our own wedding venue on a farm that had been vacant for about 8 years. My wife got a great job in Danville, North Carolina, Virginia, right over the state line. She started her own flower farming business, Caswell Flower Company. We bought a house for $39,000, which most people can't even believe is possible. And in addition to other things, I was hired on as our county's planning director, even though I didn't have any local government job experience prior to that. So the reason I wrote the book was we have had these really interesting life experiences, and we would meet and talk to people that kind of, despite the perception, we've actually built a great life here in a very rural area. And so I kind of wanted to get that out there, and then also provide it as a how-to guide in case other folks that were our age, or really any age, wanted to make a similar move to a small town.
Do you have a copy of the book so that you could flash it up on the screen so people could see the beautiful picture of your wife and you?
Actually, I do not have a copy, because even though I've ordered some author copies, they have not yet arrived. So I've seen other people who have ordered the book who have copies before I do.
Let me see if I can share.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
So let's pull this in front.
Yeah, so the cover is, that's my wife and I standing on West Main Street here in downtown, quote unquote, downtown Yanceyville. I have got a few maps and other plans in my arm there, and she's holding a bouquet of flowers that she grew and arranged herself. So we're right there in the middle of our small town, and we're kind of holding the symbols that are relative to our new professions, and we thought that would make a good cover of a book.
Yeah, and it does. It actually does.
Thank you.
So, I moved here from New Orleans in '89.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think you got your money's worth for houses. I wanted to buy a house. I didn't think you got your money's worth in New Orleans. So I was looking for a smaller place. And at the time, Asheville was pretty quiet and pretty small.
Sure.
So that is what was that housing price was what I ran into too. Back then, before Asheville became chic, I got a house for under 65,000.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And now I think it's appreciated phenomenally. So I had great beginner's luck.
Sure.
But yeah, I moved here, and at that time Asheville was pretty dead. So there were food, the restaurants, and the culture, the increased culture like we have now. So kind of can identify moving to a smaller place and taking that plunge, and actually not knowing anyone there, and basically starting a new life. And so, but you did, and you seem to be thriving there. Apparently y'all look like you're thriving well. You've got a new baby that's 4 months old, and it looks like the quality of life there, which is a really big deal,
Sure.
is good. And also, you go in the book how you established yourself in the community, so that when you were in the right place at the right time for the job that you have now. And so you really emphasize the need to be prepared to go into the community and really start from the bottom and be willing to do the janitorial work, and go on and become a fixture in the community and establish trust in the community. Because I understand, and you're going to have to prove yourself in a small community.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's quite a few points that you brought up there that are good lessons in general, and some lessons that I tried to incorporate into the book. So chapter 4, which you referred to, which is entitled How to Get Involved and Make a Difference. I talk about showing up to county commission meetings when we first moved to Caswell County, and literally there were only about 4 or 5 people in attendance. And in small towns, and honestly in a lot of places, that's very common. Most people don't go to county commission meetings, or they don't go to city council meetings or the planning board or whatever the case may be. And that is perfectly normal, because people lead busy lives. They've got a lot of things going on. And quite honestly, a lot of times it's very boring, right? So it's very normal that you really don't go to these types of meetings. But I will, as I claimed in a recent interview, I've always kind of been a political nerd. And so that's one of the first things that I did when I moved here. And it actually opened up tremendous opportunities. I got to know the county manager very well, and he later made me aware of the planning job, which I interviewed for and thankfully got. And then that also opened up the opportunity for my wife and I, just by going to these meetings and introducing ourselves. We served on a lot of boards and commissions, and we helped to shape county ordinance policy. We got involved with nonprofit activities for youth. Through my wife's involvement, she also got the job with the Danville Regional Foundation over in Danville, Virginia. And so the lesson for folks our age is, just by kind of showing up and having a willingness to involve, it really does open up tremendous opportunities for you. And part of the reason I think that it's particularly interesting in a small town and in a rural community is one of the features of my generation, of the millennial generation, is we do have a desire to really be a part of something meaningful and kind of be a part of something bigger than ourselves. And you can volunteer and you can do things and you can attend meetings and things of that nature in bigger cities, but you kind of just get drowned out. You just become one of many. And by moving to a smaller town or a rural community where there aren't that many people involved, especially if there aren't that many young people involved, you can have a pretty serious impact in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah. When I first started live streaming, and I think that political forum that I first met you at, that was one of the first ones that actually went out in the community. And so that was 10 years ago. So I've seen a tremendous change in people's involvement But in the beginning, when I started live streaming, I was the only one at like the alcohol board. I remember I went to an alcohol board, and they were like aghast that I walked in there with a camera, and they're like, "Why are you here? What do you want to film it for?"
Yeah,
But certainly Asheville, the community involvement is really greatly advanced here. So you're
sure.
right. Here, there's a huge pool of people, but in the smaller towns, millennials, people having interest in those things would be unique, and I can definitely see the advantage of concerned people showing up and being willing to pitch in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then you bought this wonderful house. And do you think your house was a kit house too? Because a lot of the bungalows and craftsman houses in Asheville are kit houses and were very well made.
Interesting.
So my house is a kit house. Almost even the Victorians in Montford were kit houses, and so they have really good bones. I mean, you've got 2x8 rafters in the basement and
Yeah.
plaster walls. So you've done a beautiful. I've watched through the years as you've done the renovation on your home, and it's really fabulous what you've done. And there are pictures in the book showing the progress in the befores and the afters. And I have to say, you did a great job renovating your house.
Well, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate that. Yeah, and I was fascinated with your story about when you first moved to Asheville and bought your house for a very affordable price, and then I'm sure over the years you've done quite a few things to it as well. I don't know that our house was a kit house. I don't have any evidence of that. I do know that the original gentleman who built the house was the postmaster for Yanceyville from, I think, the 1920s until about the 1960s. So we certainly appreciate that history. We know that there was a small addition done in the 1990s, which added some square footage. But yeah, for anyone who isn't aware, we have a 1929 Craftsman house that's just under 3,000 square feet that we bought for $39,000. And then we put about a $75,000 renovation budget into it as well. And the ebook has pictures in it. The paperback does not, because that would have made the cost of the book much more. And so anybody who wants to can go and see a few before and after pictures at my website, which is howtothinksmall.com.
And then at the end of the book, you've got a great list of different things to do in this process of becoming a small town person. What to watch out for, what to look for. One of the things is finding a good contractor, which when you're going to be renovating a house, that is a very valuable thing to have.
Yeah.
People are worth their weight in gold. And so the list that you have at the end of the book were based on your own experience and full of very helpful tips.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. That was not originally part of my plan, but as I was finishing up a draft of the book, I actually sent it to a friend in Chicago because my target audience are going to be folks like me and my wife who live in bigger cities and they want to kind of move out to the country. And so I sent it to a friend in Chicago, and he read through it and said, it's great, but maybe add like a checklist or something in the back so that people it'll kind of spark their ideas so that they can get going as well. And it serves as kind of a standard book, but then also like a tutorial and a how-to guide at the same time. So I'm glad that you appreciated the checklists in the back.
Yes, and the other thing is you actually had a hand in bringing higher quality broadband to your community. And, with the pandemic situation and being things so much being switched to online, you've got to have reliable broadband. And but you also have opportunities that have arisen out of the pandemic where people can operate from a home office or a small office in a small city have a very good quality of life and use the internet to do whatever they need to be doing out in the world. And I'm sure you're very aware of that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so just in terms of broadband and connectivity in general, so as the county planner, that's part of my job and responsibility. I'm responsible for reviewing all new cell tower development plans that come into the county, and I started an initiative aimed at expanding broadband internet service throughout the county as well. And we were fortunate enough, we were originally awarded a $1.5 million grant, or I should say, technically, a broadband provider was awarded that money, but it has to be spent inside the county. And so I think that's another lesson too for anybody who assumes that if they moved to a small town, they wouldn't know anybody. They wouldn't know what life would be like. That's again another good example of kind of the tremendous impact that you can have by moving into a small town and being willing to do the work and apply your talents to that situation. But yeah, as I mentioned in the book, as I talk specifically about my advice, if somebody is going to take my book and then actually do some research on internet connectivity, because rural areas throughout the entire country still struggle with connectivity. When we lived in Asheville, we just assumed that everybody had internet and that it wasn't even an issue anymore. We moved out here, thankfully, even though we were wrong, thankfully, the places that we've lived have had great internet service, but that is definitely a big piece of advice. And I think too, especially as people make a move from a larger city to a smaller town, let's say that you live right now in, Portland or Seattle, and you're thinking, maybe I'm going to move to a mountainous town in Idaho, but I'm going to take my job with me. You better do a little bit of research and make sure that there's good connectivity there. And another thing that I talk about too is even if there isn't connectivity, a lot of small towns are in the process of or have already built co-working spaces. So there is a remote work from home, or at least a kind of a co-working office opportunity, even if there isn't great internet where you live.
Yeah, the co-working thing, I think that you, in the book, you went from a couple of different locations. It seems like, and it didn't cost that much to be in that co-working situation, which
Right.
makes a huge difference. I know when you're thinking small, you don't want to go in with a lot of debt, and you don't want to go in with a lot of overhead.
Right.
So it seems to me like you did the right thing there. So you think your target audience are people like you who are in the position, and I think you have to be in the position to be able to consider going smaller and going to a situation or a city where you can eventually have a very positive impact on that community.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm hungry for people coming in with a different educational experience, a different perspective, and taking the plunge and doing it, and having horse farms in your area that you can have your kid have a pony.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. As I wrote and then as I finished the book, I envision my book landing in the hands of somebody who maybe they live in Chicago and they're kind of middle management at one of several microbreweries, but they think, I'm getting caught up in the rat race here in Chicago. Maybe I want to move to a small town, buy a property, and then by doing so, they would instantly be the number one brewery in town. Or somebody who lives in a downtown high rise in New York City, where during COVID they couldn't even use the gym in their building, but they can work remotely. So maybe they want to get out to upstate New York or somewhere rural, keep their job, but then actually have more room and space to move and grow a family and save money on places to live and those sorts of things. So that's the goal. I'd love for my book to get in the hands of those folks and for them to seriously consider making that type of move. But I will say, and as I have joked, anybody who wants to follow this advice is welcome to, regardless of their age or their generation. And anybody who wants to can buy a copy of the book as well, even if they're not a millennial.
So, had you started the book before the pandemic hit?
I did, yeah. So I started the book actually about a year ago. I think it was mid-July. My wife and I had been to a wedding, or we had been somewhere and run into some folks, and told that story that I told you earlier, where they say, "I can't believe that you guys live there. How do you do it?" And we had kind of gotten to a point where we moved here. We became familiar with a lot of folks in the community, and she started her business, and we got the house, and I got my job. And I kind of stopped for a second, and I said, I need to write all this stuff down, or I might forget it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I was on my lunch break one day, and I just started with the chapter 1, quote unquote, how to move to the middle of nowhere, which kind of retells the story of having that conversation, making the decision to move, and then having the conversation with my boss to actually do it. I started there and just kind of slowly worked on it as the months went by. And then I think it was around March where I said, we started seeing news reports of people that were really locked in because of COVID. And I said, this might be interesting for them to read.
Timing, perfect timing.
Yeah, it might be interesting for them to read, because I kept seeing a lot of stories about people in big cities that were really itching to get out once the COVID lockdown started earlier this spring.
So while we're wrapping up here, tell people where they can get a copy of your book.
So the book is available on Amazon. Probably the best way to find it is if you go to my website, howtothinksmall.com. There is a purchase page there, and that will give you direct links to the ebook, the paperback, or if you wanted to buy a paperback and have me sign it, then there's an option for that as well. So again, the website is howtothinksmall.com.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. Thanks for sharing your experience and the helpful hints that will help people make that huge transition. And it's very generous of you to be sharing that with people. And I wish you and Celia the absolute best. And this is WPVM 1037, and we're signing off.
Thanks, Davine.
Bye-bye.